Hello, everybody. How are you tonight? Stacy, hey, hey. Dolores, how are you, Dolores? Sandy, hi, Sandy. Steve says, good evening. That is Steve Wolfbrandt. And Aaron Landcastle says, Congress is not an essential workforce. I think we're beginning to see how essential it is now because it's essential for us. It's essential for them to start doing things for us. And they are not doing that, are they? Not much. Not much at all. Please share, 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 of course. That goes without saying. And I'm going to start going to my commentary on a variety of articles. But you will see why I've entitled this. What did I entitle this again? Oh, yes. The economic crisis and the neoliberal leaders of the government. So, the first thing I'd like to cover is a post that appeared in Common Dreams today on April 29th. And the post is by Jessica Corbett, one of their staff writers. And I'll share the screen for you right now. The title of the post is 100 plus economists push Nancy Pelosi to urgently boost relief for workers and stem the massive surge in unemployment. And more than 100 economists in a pair of letters urged Democratic House Speaker Nancy Pelosi to increase relief for workers who were affected by the pandemic by making substantial improvements to the federal short-time compensation program and passing Pramila Jayapal's Paycheck Guarantee Act. Both letters point out that over 26 million people have filed for unemployment benefits since the middle of March, a figure that undercounts the real number of job losses. And you recall we went over that it may be, we may have an undercount as high as 12.2 million workers, which would bring the number of unemployed up to 38.6 million workers. And then there's another roughly 6 million that were unemployed before March 15th and probably still are. And there we are up to 44.6 million. And the article goes on, and that while Coronavirus Aid, Relief, and Economic Security Act for March has provided some help, it doesn't meet the scale of the COVID-19 crisis. And that's a quote from the letter. It does not meet the scale of the COVID-19 crisis. Jayapal, as you know, is co-chair of the Congressional Progressive Caucus, the CPC, and her legislation would allow businesses nationwide to continue paying 100% of their employees' salaries up to $100,000 annually, following the lead of various countries in Europe. The bill was welcomed by labor unions and by small business advocates. But of course, the Congress has yet to act on the bill. Specifically, Nancy Pelosi in the House has yet to act on the bill. She hasn't brought it to the floor. She hasn't even arranged for a system for remote voting so people can vote at a distance. Of course, the letter points out that the CARES 1 Act, passed on April 23rd, that provided more funding for the Paycheck Protection Program, fails to adequately address the fallout from the pandemic. I'm sorry, that was not the CARES Act. It was the supplement, okay, to the CARES Act, the so-called the Interim Act. And there goes my camera once again. Hopefully this will be a minor adjustment, but I think you can still hear me. It is a minor adjustment. How nice. So, okay, the letter said it fails to adequately address the fallout from the pandemic. And, quote again, the Paycheck Guarantee Act does much more to prevent the mass layoffs, keeping businesses intact, and facilitates a faster recovery, unquote. Jayapal tweeted, all these problems with hashtag PPP would be addressed in hashtag Paycheck Guarantee Act, which is scalable, ongoing, based on percent of revenue loss, and until economic indicators are reached. It's a grant, okay, it's not a loan. 25% of it is for rent, okay, for utilities and other expenses. And it comes direct from the Treasury and the IRS, no banks involved. So the payment would be much quicker. And there's a link to a New York Times article on the Paycheck Guarantee Act. There's a lady with a T-shirt saying "I love her" on it, and she had 135 employees in her bakery. And she pointed out that the PPP program, the Paycheck Protection Program, may not be enough to save my bakery. She doesn't think it's going to be enough to save her bakery. Quote, okay, this is a quote from the president of the Economic Policy Institute, Thea Lee. Quote, Congress has the power to protect ordinary workers during this public health and economic crisis. The Paycheck Guarantee Act will help businesses keep workers on payroll till the crisis is over, preserving economic security, benefits, and employment relationships. Lee signed on to both letters, which were published on the EPI website and organized by the Congressional Progressive Caucus Center. Among the other signatories were Robert Pollan, University of Massachusetts Amherst, Jeffrey Sachs of Columbia, also former Secretary of Labor, Professor Robert Reich of the University of California at Berkeley, Eileen Applebaum, Dean Baker, and Mark Weisbrot of the Center for Economic and Policy Research. And Baker, in a statement, explained the benefits of a stronger federal short-time compensation or work-sharing program that uses unemployment insurance to cover the costs of allowing employers to cut hours for all workers instead of laying them off entirely. And a quote from Dean Baker, quote, work sharing has a well-established track record of keeping workers on the payroll through recession in Germany and other countries. has enjoyed support across the political spectrum and from both business and labor. It is time that the United States should actually modernize and ramp up its work sharing system so that it is the standard method through which employers deal with downturns in demand. And Mark Pocan said, millions of working people have lost their jobs or businesses because of this pandemic. We can do more to help them. Here's how, and there's a link to a blog from The Hill, and the blog is about WorkShare, how to help workers, businesses, and states. And you can link to that from here. And the CPC co-chair, Mark Pocan, who's a Democrat from Wisconsin, highlighting a proposal from Jayapal's CPC co-chair. The second letter calls for improving the federal work-sharing program by allowing employers participating in the work-sharing program to reduce hours worked by employees to 20% of their normal working hours, having the federal government temporarily cover 100% of work-sharing program costs in all states. And the third case, allowing all businesses to participate in work sharing regardless of firm size. And he says a stronger federal work sharing program could slow the rise in unemployment. Strengthening work sharing along with the payroll subsidies could bring about a quicker and broader economic recovery. It is important that Congress act decisively and enact these measures without a delay. The letters came just a day after House leaders reversed plans to return to Washington, D.C. next week and ahead of an ad hoc remote hearing on economic solutions to the pandemic hosted by the CPC, which will feature testimony from Eric Beinhacker of the Institute for New Economic Thinking at the University of Oxford, who signed both letters to Pelosi. And there is a link to a Facebook video which occurred this afternoon, and that's the CPC remote hearing video at which a number of people spoke, and they spoke about the work sharing program and also the Jayapal bill, and they discussed it, and there were many good people on who are participating in that hearing that was conducted by Zoom, and it's a good thing to take a look at. It certainly is. It's an hour hearing. It's worthwhile taking in the hour and seeing what people in the CPC have to say. They seem to have started to fight for us. I hope it's not but too late to do anything, because as I've said earlier and a lot of other people have said, Nancy Pelosi has given up a lot of the leverage that was there for the progressive side at the beginning of the bailout. If the progressives only would have agreed with other Democrats to vote against any bailout of the large corporations. Once the bailout of the large corporations was arranged, however, a lot of the leverage which the progressives had prior to the CARES Act was already gone, and is already gone now. Now, leverage is building up again because of how many people are unemployed and how many people don't have any health care now, okay, and it's in the middle of the crisis, and also for other reasons that we're going to go over in a few minutes, okay. And here's one of the reasons now, and let me share this one with you as well. There is a strike movement going on now. Strike, strike, strike. Workers gear up for major May Day strike in a pushback against unsafe conditions amidst the pandemic. Workers at some of the nation's biggest companies, including Amazon and Target, are preparing to symbolically lock arms Friday for a May 1 strike and demand better protections on the front lines of the coronavirus pandemic. And someone who's certainly going to cover the strike is Michael Sionato. And there's a tweet from him, in the article with a nice figure on the May Day general strike. And I covered, an article from Popular Resistance yesterday that also talked about the coming strike and what people can do to support the May Day strike. And this graphic says Amazon, Whole Foods, Target, and Instacart workers are striking on May 1st. Support essential workers. Don't cross the picket lines. Among the lead organizers of the action, the Motherboard publication reported Wednesday is Chris Smalls, the Amazon worker who was fired last month from his job at the Amazon Fulfillment Center in Staten Island after organizing a protest. And a quote from Chris Smalls, he formed an alliance between a bunch of different companies because we all have one common goal, which is to save the lives of workers and communities. And more from Chris Smalls. Right now isn't the time to open up the economy, Smalls added. Quote, again, Amazon is a breeding ground for this virus, which is spreading right now through multiple facilities. And Amazon has a lot of facilities now across the country, and the virus is probably spreading in every one of them. And also Sonali, what is her name again? Sonali, I forgot Sonali's last name, but she's at RU with Sonali. The last name begins with K. It's a little hard to pronounce, so I need to see it. But she's a well-known journalist. Anyway, she tweeted Chris Smalls at shutdown on Amazon, former hashtag Amazon warehouse worker talks about organizing for hashtag May Day labor actions. And you could listen to the conversation today on at KPFA 94.1 starting at 3:10 p.m. PT, Pacific time. Or watch it later at risingupwithsonali.com, so you can watch it there. Hashtag shutdown Amazon. Adam Ryan, who works at a Target store in Virginia, is another lead organizer of the May Day action. He explained to Motherboard that the goal of the strike is to, quote, to shut down industry across the board and push back with large numbers against the right-wing groups that want to risk our lives by reopening the economy, unquote. As Motherboard reported, while the mass strike action might not be enough to shut down society, the collective action certainly echoes the calls for a general strike, a coordinated work stoppage across businesses and industries in pursuit of a common goal, the likes of which have not been seen in the United States since World War II. The workers are demanding their profitable employers have to provide increased pay and paid leave, health insurance for all workers, and for COVID-19 affected stores to be shut. The workers are also calling on customers to show solidarity by not shopping at the stores on May 1st, according to a flyer shared on social media. So don't go to those stores tomorrow. Don't shop at Whole Foods. Call your state officials, in local stores. No shopping at Target tomorrow either. Whole Foods made their own Whole Foods t-shirt to raise money for a strike fund. And there's a link to that there. The Intercept also reported on the upcoming strike with Daniel Medina writing Tuesday. The May 1st strike is the latest in a wave of actions led by union and non-union frontline workers. And he mentions the Amazon workers in New York City and the Instacart workers, more than 10,000 of them across the country, staging a walkout. And Whole Foods employees led a national sick-out on March 31st, while upwards of 800 workers skipped their shifts at a Colorado meatpacking plant as coronavirus cases were confirmed among employees. Sanitation workers in Pittsburgh and bus drivers in Detroit both staged wildcat strikes. These workers have been exploited so shamelessly for so long by these companies while performing incredibly important but largely invisible labor, unquote, said Steve Breyer, a labor historian and professor at the Cooney School of Labor and Urban Studies. And quote again, all of a sudden they're deemed essential workers in a pandemic, giving them tremendous leverage and power if they organize collectively. So, folks, I sure hope that unions are back with a vengeance. And quote, May 1st is a celebration of working people around the world, Margaret Kimberly wrote Wednesday at Black Agenda Report. And quote again, it is the perfect moment to begin the fight for economic justice, which has accelerated due to the COVID-19 pandemic. Absolutely. So we've got incoming strikes, and calls by lots of economists for Nancy Pelosi and for progressives in Congress to do something for the people, do something for the people. And let's now share this next one. This was published today, written by Julia Conley, another staff writer from Common Dreams. And the headline is calling economic crisis a 5-alarm fire for millions of families. 600,000 sign a petition demanding rent and mortgage cancellation. And they are intensifying the call being directed at Congress to cancel rent and mortgage and utility payments in tandem with a full moratorium on evictions and shutoffs until the crisis, is over. And actually the petition was put together by Parents Together Action. And they presented the 600,000 signatures they gathered after conducting a survey of 1,200 families across the country about their financial well-being since the coronavirus began spreading across the U.S. over the last 2 months, forcing millions of businesses to close and lay off or furlough their workers. About half of the families surveyed said they won't be able to pay their rent, their mortgage, or utility bills on May 1st. Without cutting back on other essentials such as groceries, while 43% of the respondents said they also expected to be unable to pay in June. Quote, this economic crisis is a 5-alarm fire and our government is just letting it burn. Right back to Hooverism in the 1930s. Just let it burn. It'll get better all by itself. Millions of families can't afford rent or other basic necessities, said Justin Rubin, co-director of Parents Together. And quote again, they're begging for relief that for many just isn't coming. Congress needs to act at the scale of the crisis, and they should start by canceling rent, mortgage, and utility payments for the duration. So, to the calls for making the companies take care of their workers, and the calls for strikes to force them to do it, and to the calls from the economists to pass better laws to protect people who have gone out of work. We add the call for a moratorium on rent, on mortgages, and on utilities. And people want a moratorium on those for the duration of the crisis. Many households are still anxiously awaiting the arrival of unemployment benefits and the $1,200 one-time payment the federal government is sending to many Americans. Once again, I haven't seen that. Have you seen that? But 60% of those surveyed say they had yet to receive either, and more than a quarter said they had already spent their stimulus check. On social media, Parents Together posted a video showing several parents describing their struggles amid the public health and economic crisis. I'm going to check to see if you can see and hear this particular video. You may be able to.
People are in desperate and dire need of more help. There are so many people out of work and out of jobs.
I got bills. I got, my phone bill, gas and electric, rent.
I know the stimulus check did hit, which we were able to catch up on some of our bills, but didn't catch up all of it. The rent's gonna be due again soon.
I can't afford all of this.
I got a phone call from my doctor telling me if I get COVID-19, it'll be detrimental and deadly to me. I had to have my husband pulled out from his essential job. He's not working, therefore that means either no bills or no rent, no food, and no medication.
I haven't been working for about 3 weeks. Believe me, it's rough right now.
Not been able to pay my electric bill. I've not been able to pay my water bill, and I've not been able to pay my rent.
Right now, I am unable to return to work because I have to take care of my daughter.
Trying to apply for programs that just aren't there.
We elected people out there to understand that this crisis is really taking a toll on our family.
I'm not able to work. I'm a single father. I have a 14-year-old son. I'm taking care of my grandfather who's in a wheelchair, and we are really struggling.
The amount of income that I was bringing in is drastically been, diminished.
It's just taking its toll on me.
We need some help.
The little ones out here, we need your help.
All I ask is that you guys help people who are really trying to help themselves.
Please, reach out and help.
The struggle is real. We are real. And we just want to do it the best that we can. Hear us and help us. Thank you.
So there we go. And skipping a little, there are local officials across the country urging rent cancellation. While at the federal level, Ilhan Omar, Democrat of Minnesota, has introduced some legislation to cancel rent and mortgage payments, I believe also utilities during the crisis. The bill has been endorsed by several national economic justice groups and is co-sponsored by other progressive lawmakers, including Representatives Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez and Pramila Jayapal and Jesus Chuy Garcia. And Pramila Jayapal has tweeted, "We need more than a moratorium to avoid total economic collapse. We must cancel rent and mortgages before May 1st." Doesn't look like Congress is going to do that. The House isn't even in session, of course. In a video posted to social media, Ocasio-Cortez, let me see what's going on here. You can still see that. Good. Ocasio-Cortez expanded on how rent and mortgage payments could be suspended temporarily during the crisis. And The Hill tweeted, Representative AOC, here's the path to canceling rent. We're going to lay it out right here. Watch. And AOC lays out a method by which rent and mortgages can be suspended to help both renters and mom and pop landlords. And let's see if I can play this one too.
And so what do we need to do to make sure that we actually help real people? And that goes for renters, but it also goes for mom and pop landlords. You know, one of the first things that we talk about, which is our first demand, is rent cancellation. And oftentimes the first reaction is, what about the landlords? What about people with mortgages? What about, you know, mom and pops? And I think it's important to recognize the fact that there are some folks that have, you know, that are mom and pop landlords that own maybe one home and that they rent out to tenants. But the thing is that there's a huge difference between that and a commercial landlord that owns a huge luxury condominium with tons of people, or even just any that owns a huge building with tons of units that's hiking up rent on all of their tenants. So first of all, that's an important distinction. The second thing that we're fighting for, though, is mortgage suspension as well. On the federal level, we need to make sure that mortgages and rent are completely taken care of so that there is no excuse for a person being removed. We need to make sure that we're taking very clear federal action to suspend both mortgage and rent payments in this time. And it's actually, when you think about how this is structured, it's not hard. One thing that you can do is just suspend mortgage payments. Like, here's the path to canceling rent. We're going to lay it out right here. And here's just one path of canceling rent. There's a couple of ways that we can go about this, but here's one very clear way. One way that we can cancel rent is to suspend mortgage payments for the cancellation period. Let's say we want to start with 3 months. Suspend mortgage payments for 3 months. Tack that on to the end of the repayment period. So let's say you have a 10-year mortgage, just suspend it for 3 months and make it a 10-year and 3-month mortgage so that you just make 3 additional payments at the very end. Now, what that allows you to do is it opens up the time, and you can take that suspension time to cancel rent, to make sure that we cancel the rent of any tenants in that building. They don't have to pay it back, and it does not create an additional financial liability on that landlord. So that's a very broad stroke way. Of course, there are other issues that we'll have to address, like property taxes and other issues. But if you have been collecting rent up until this time, then it also means that we can figure this out. We can figure it out. But right now, the question is not, can we get it done? And sorry if you hear the sirens in the background, everybody. I'm in the Bronx, and unfortunately, we're hearing these all day. But what we can do is that, and rather what our issue is right now, is not that it's impossible to do, and it's not that we can't do it. It's that we lack enough politicians with the political will to actually help people who are tenants, and to actually help people who are mom and pop landlords.
Okay, so that's what Ocasio-Cortez had to say. Excuse me, my computer is failing to respond to my commands. I should be able to get rid of this in just a minute, hopefully. All right. I've never had that happen before. I'll stop sharing that article. And now see if I can get rid of that. Okay. So that's basically the story there. It's an economic emergency, and it's got to be met, and Congress isn't moving. Nancy Pelosi's not moving. Kevin McCarthy is not moving in the House. And Mitch McConnell is not moving in the Senate. And Chuck Schumer is not moving, okay, in the Senate. Neither are any of their major lieutenants moving. There's so far very little pressure on them as people continue to suffer. And so, but Congress is not the only failure in this particular situation. There's another unsurprising but very, very highly visible failure. And that failure is the failure of the big kahuna. The big kahuna. And you know who that is, of course. Headline, quote, pathetic, unquote. Trump says no to additional COVID-19 stimulus checks. Backs cutting tax that funds Social Security instead. President Donald Trump on Tuesday expressed opposition to providing additional direct relief payments on top of the $1,200 checks that are slowly trickling out to eligible U.S. households, saying he would instead prefer to slash the tax that funds Social Security and Medicare. How does that help the people who no longer have work? Trump. We're now approaching, if people are right about the undercount of 12.2 million, we're now approaching 44 million people who don't have work. They're not subject to the payroll tax right now. They're not subject to the payroll tax. Trump says, well, I like the idea of payroll tax cuts, he says at a press conference. I've liked that from the beginning, the president said. That was a thing that I really would love to see happen. A lot of economists would agree with me. A lot of people agree with me. And I think, frankly, it's simple. It's not the big distribution, and it would really be an incentive for people to come back to work and for employers to hire. People don't need an incentive to come back to work except for you to make the workplace safe for them. Make the workplace safe. Make it safe. Make it safe. Make it safe. Make it safe. People don't need a negative incentive to be forced to come back to work and risk their lives. That's not what they need. And if they get that from you, guess what they're going to do in the fall? Guess what they're going to do in the fall? Trump then starts talking about completely irrelevant issues. He wants blue states to give him sanctuary city adjustments in exchange for federal financial relief. This guy is just a criminal. He is just a criminal. He has floated the idea of a payroll tax cut several times in recent weeks. Yes, it's one of his distractions, suggesting at one point earlier this month that the cut should be permanent, even though the move would not provide any relief for the tens of millions of people who have lost their jobs since mid-March. Quote, economists don't actually agree with him, said Justin Wolfers, economics professor at University of Michigan. And quote again, payroll tax cuts are too slow and poorly targeted. But, they mention, a payroll tax cut would advance a long-standing objective of the conservative movement by striking a blow to Social Security and Medicare funding, advocacy groups pointed out. The CARES Act, which Trump signed into law last month, contained a little noticed provision allowing employers to delay their payment of the payroll tax for at least the rest of 2020. Unlike stimulus checks, cutting payroll taxes does nothing to help seniors or the millions of people who just lost their job, tweeted Social Security Works. It does, however, defund Social Security and Medicare, which is why Trump is obsessed with the idea. It doesn't defund Social Security and Medicare because those taxes do not actually go to pay for Social Security and for Medicare. They go into general revenue. And the Treasury Department, well, if they go into general revenue, that means they're destroyed by the Federal Reserve on the way in. This tax revenue doesn't really pay for federal spending. What pays for federal spending is the Federal Reserve marking up the Treasury spending account. Now, that does happen based on some triggers. One of these triggers is tax revenue coming in, which the Federal Reserve destroys in the process of settlement, but that's neither here nor there in this particular context. The point is, if Congress appropriates funds for Social Security, and Medicare, which it always does sooner or later, then that's what, in the first place, funds Social Security. That's what gives, and Medicare, that's what gives the Treasury the mandate to either mint coins or sell bonds or tax to provide the Federal Reserve with the signals it needs, with the triggers, with the rules it needs, or fulfillment of the rules it needs to add funds to the Treasury spending account. Anyway, the article adds, because they think it defunds Social Security and Medicare, that's why Trump is obsessed with the idea, because he wants to defund Social Security, and Medicare. Everybody believes it defunds Social Security, and Medicare, but in fact, it really does not. What would defund Social Security, and Medicare, the only thing that would, is for Congress not to vote the appropriations needed for Social Security and for Medicare. That's it. That's what determines whether those are funded or not in the first analysis. The president's opposition to additional direct payments comes as our progressive lawmakers and activists are pushing for $2,000 monthly payments to all U.S. households for the duration of the COVID-19 crisis, because the initial $1,200 for those lucky enough to have received it was far from sufficient to cover basic expenses. Pathetic, Bernie Sanders, independent of Vermont, said in response to Trump's remarks. Quote, a payroll tax cut does nothing for the 26 million people who lost their jobs. Why does everybody keep forgetting to add the additional 6 million people who were unemployed before these further losses even started? Isn't it more impressive to say the 32 million people who are unemployed? Or even more impressive to say to factor in those extra 12.2 million people who aren't even counted, the 44.2 million people or 44.6 million people or whatever it is who are unemployed. With rent due on May 1st, we need to provide $2,000 a month to everyone until this crisis is over. And I have to emphasize that. What the Jayapal and Rashida Tlaib bill would be to give $2,000 a month to everyone, not just to people who recently lost their jobs, but to everyone, including the 12.2 million people who aren't even counted. All 44.4 or 6 million people, or however many there are, would be covered. And everyone else would be covered too, but they would then be subject to taxation for the 2,000. In other words, it would be gotten back at the back end. So, not only is the neoliberal leadership in Congress totally failing us with its usual austerity games for us, while lavishing all kinds of support on large corporations and to a lesser extent on some smaller corporations that do not actually deserve it, but on quite a number of smaller corporations that actually do deserve it. But again, support for them, austerity for us. Trickle down, always trickle down from the Republicans and from the Democrats. Nothing bottom up like the Jayapal Tlaib bill, which actually was the Tlaib bill until she decided to get co-sponsorship, introductory co-sponsorship from Jayapal, the co-chair of the Congressional Progressive Caucus, which, by the way, was a very good idea on her. Back again. Sorry about that. I hope you're sharing this. So that's the kind of leadership we're getting. Let's hear more about our leadership from Dave Dayen and his column for today, which I will now... Huh? Okay, you should be seeing this now. I should be sharing it. I think I am sharing it. Cool. It's the unsanitized column by Dave Dayen. How the parties play the coronavirus response game in Congress. So he's characterizing it as a game. It was written today. It was his column for today. Nice picture of the Capitol and Moscow Mitch. And he says, say what you will about Mitch McConnell and say it a lot, but he knows how to negotiate. And that's the caption for the photo. And here's the first response. On the CARES Act and its recent expansion, the Senate took the lead in crafting the packages. On Phase 4, quote unquote, or quote, Phase Q, unquote, or whatever they're calling the next bill, the House is supposed to take the lead, with Republicans in control of the Senate and Democrats in control of the House. This gives us a natural experiment in how each party handles actual negotiations. Now, I do want to add that All the money bills are supposed to originate in the House. He says on the CARES 4 Act and its recent expansion, the Senate took the lead in crafting the packages. That shouldn't have happened. Those were money bills. And the House was supposed to take the lead in those bills as well. But anyway, so Dave is looking at a natural experiment into how each party handles the negotiations on bills. Now, of course, we've already had that experiment with these other money bills, and we've seen how the House has been handling the negotiations. It's basically been handing the lead over to the Senate. But anyway, to go on with the column. The Senate fully wrote their CARES Act bills, setting the baseline for the negotiation. Then Democrats suggested tweaks. The Senate put their bills on the floor for votes, trying to intimidate the opposition. Those efforts failed, but the end result were minor improvements that kept the baseline framework and gave very little to most people, right? The House hasn't written its Phase 4 bill, but the most prominent force in shaping it so far is Senate Majority Leader Mitch McConnell. First, he floated that cities and states should go bankrupt instead of receiving financial aid in order to prevent a depression. That was a thinly veiled attempt to bust public employee pensions. Then he said that any future bill must include a broad liability shield for reopened businesses, protecting them from lawsuits over COVID-19 infections. So notice what's happening here. In other action, what Trump is saying, he's ordering people back to work. He wants to open up the economy, and the way he's going to do that is to say everybody back to work, and then the companies are going to order the people back to work. And meanwhile, Mitch McConnell is trying to negotiate a broad liability shield for the businesses that are ordering their employees back to work in unsafe conditions, so if their employees die or get sick, they will not be able to sue those companies over the fact they will not have provided adequate safety conditions under the law for their employees. So it's coming at the employees from two directions. From the president, who's going to order the opening of the economy sometime soon, or is going to try to do that unless there's total public opposition to it, and also from the Congress, one party of which is working assiduously to provide a liability shield for these businesses willing to risk the lives of their workers. So Dave points out, this is just a pure set of talking points. I am so livid about this. This is just a pure set of talking points from the Chamber of Commerce and the National Association of Manufacturers, whose members don't want to invest in keeping workers and customers safe and who would rather get Congress to bail them out from that investment. Finally, on Tuesday, McConnell defied House Democrats and even President Trump by saying he doesn't favor any infrastructure spending in the next bill. Quote, "We need to keep the White House in the box," he told his caucus. And quote again, "The Democrats and the White House both need to get the message." Maybe what the White House needs to say to McConnell is there's no way people are going back to work if the employers have no liability for their safety. No way that's going to happen, Moscow Mitch. Moreover, I'm the President of the United States, and I have a lot of people in the Senate who follow me. And if they vote along with the Democrats in the Senate And I want infrastructure spending. We're going to have infrastructure spending, whether you like it or not. Maybe this feckless president needs to be saying that to Moscow Mitch. Anyway, so Dave goes on. He says, so there's the coronavirus response negotiation framework of each party. Democrats wait for Republicans to complete their work, make helpful suggestions, and eventually get to a place where they pass the bills, almost unanimously. Republicans don't wait for any bill, instead making a list of demands first and vowing to prevent anything that doesn't include them from passage. And the Republican demands, of course, are far more aligned of the lines of defining the package rather than moving it in a friendlier direction. Republicans act and Democrats react. And Dave says, it's good to have definitive evidence of this. Dave, how much more definitive evidence do you need? We've been getting this definitive evidence since 2010. They've been acting this way since, well, actually, it first started in 2009, continued in 2010, and the pattern was thoroughly established when they took over the House in 2011. Then they made their demands in the bills they passed through the House, and they left the Democrats in the Senate to react. And they forced us into the fiscal cliff. Except they didn't force us into the fiscal cliff. We can see now, from what's happening now, that it was the Democrats who allowed themselves to be forced in. They could have made their own demands explicit from the start when they had control of the Senate, and they could have said to the Republicans, nothing's getting passed to give you anything until you incorporate these demands of ours in your legislation. Why didn't the Democrats do that? Because they share the neoliberal framework with the Republicans. They share the same basic framework about what they call fiscal responsibility, which the Republicans, of course, conveniently forget about when they want to give big money to their cronies and their friends, but which the Democrats are always left to remember, so they can tell their constituencies, we are the fiscally responsible ones. Don't you feel good about that? Getting poorer and poorer and poorer with each passing year because your representatives won't represent you? Meanwhile, going on with the article, I don't know why there's very much anticipation of a Phase 4 bill when the House doesn't exist as an institution anymore. Steny Hoyer delayed the House return from recess slated for next week, citing unspecified consultation with the White House physician. In actuality, members were concerned about safety, he said. We still don't have remote voting after Democrats punted on it last week. The new Democrat coalition, a group of centrist legislators, so sick of hearing about those centrists. Why don't we just kick them out of the party? A group of centrists endorsed remote voting on Monday for no later than the week of May 4th, vowing to vote for any resolution, even if Republicans oppose wholesale. But that requires a vote to get that done, and nobody will be in. So the House is in suspended animation, unable to take the lead on anything, facilitating the leadership of Moscow Mitch on this Phase 4 bill. So how can Nancy Pelosi promise what she promises for this bill? She says it's going to be big. She says it's going to take care of the people. How can this be the case when you're not even leading on this goddamn bill, Nancy? The Senate, by contrast, will be back next week. mostly to confirm a bunch of right-wing judges. What else? 100 senators in a similar-sized chamber as the 435-member House means physical distancing can be more easily practiced. But that only should have added urgency to House Democrats to figure out a remote voting solution. Instead, they have managed to lose leverage and disenfranchise their entire chamber, as McConnell bulldozes them and gets key priorities accomplished. So much for the leadership of Nancy Pelosi. It stinks. It is so visible that it stinks. It is so visible that she is through as a leader. She is done. We need to get the next generation in, specifically Shahed Buttar. We need to get him elected in San Francisco this year, so Nancy Pelosi is kaput from the Congress. It's now passé to say that the crisis spotlight shines on existing cracks in our society. But existing cracks in our politics are being exposed too, says Dave. Then he talks about an incredible series over at the Prospect, the American Prospect, his magazine that this is a column in, about the future of labor in post-pandemic America. And they have articles from 7 journalists prominent in this area, okay, who are writing about this. And so he's advertising this here, and he urges you to check out this series. And he says, you may not know it, but I also run a magazine in addition to writing a daily report. This, by the way, okay, this next is a homework assignment he wants to give us. This happens to be my crunch week for the magazine, so I am unable to give something the attention it deserves. But the magazine, I believe, is a monthly, so that's where you come in, if I recall correctly. It's a monthly. But Donna Shalala, who readers may know, failed to disclose stock sales for the entirety of her tenure in Congress in violation of federal law. When caught, she vowed to get the half a dozen disclosures out into the world as soon as possible. It turns out there were 556 unreported transactions. At $200 per violation, that should be a $111,200 fine, which should wipe out the national debt unless I did the math wrong. You did the math wrong, Dave. Shalala has sent $1,200, still clinging to the half dozen missed reports. By the way, that $1,200 is equivalent to her stimulus check, which she probably hasn't even gotten yet, which would have had a collection of sales on each. But that's not important right now. The transactions include purchases, not just sales. As recently as last summer, Shalala was buying individual stock, including Exact Sciences Corp., which does colon cancer screenings, but also Novacure Limited, a cancer treatment company, and Global Blood Therapeutics, a drug company. She sits on the Education and Labor Committee, which has jurisdiction over health care. She's already admitted to not selling all of her stock in by United Health, where she sat on the board for 6 years. That's a plain and simple conflict of interest. Yeah, it's not even the appearance of conflict of interest. It is a conflict of interest. I want to know if there are more, but my time is short, says Dave. Your mission, should you choose to accept it, is to scan the 556 transactions in the transaction report, to which Dave kindly links here. The P in transition type stands for purchase, and the S stands for sale. You see, a lot of times the P will offset the S, which maybe means the conversion of the stock into the blind trust, unquote. Question mark. Others are just straight sales. I want to know how many purchases there are without sales. I also want to compare this to Shalala's initial financial disclosure to see if there are any stocks that don't appear to have been sold. They could have been sold in between the end of 2018 and her January 3rd, 2019 swearing in, but that's unlikely, says Dave. And then he says, let's crowdsource this thing. Let me know what you see. And then he has a little thing in there about, my mouth is still hanging open over this New York Times story. It's about Treasury Secretary Mnuchin vowing to audit any small business loan over $2 million to screen for companies deemed undeserving who got the forgivable loans. But the interesting part is when Richard Hunt, president of the Consumer Bankers Association, states that quote, the government should have given money directly to businesses or offered even more generous economic stimulus payments or unemployment insurance. Seems like the Consumer Bankers Association is coming out in favor of the Jayapal Ta'i bill. I get that banks are frustrated by the terrible government IT infrastructure, making it hard to process loans, the confusions of the program, and how it may sully their reputations. But here you have the trade group leader of one of the biggest institutions in America saying the problem was that the government outsourced the function it should provide itself. In other words, the first impulse should be public provision of services, not privatization. And Dave ends then by what I think was a brilliant column, saying, duly noted for the future. And that's that. So that is our terrible neo-leadership in Washington. Absolutely feckless. Absolutely feckless. These folks are awful. They are selfish. They are feckless. I think a lot of them are evil. I really do. Corrupt. Totally. We need to turn as many of them out as we possibly can. As we possibly can. If we turned them all out in the Senate, then the Senate would switch sides. It wouldn't be quite as evil as it is now. It might then just be feckless and selfish, but not really entirely evil. Which means if they got a Jayapal Ta'i bill from the House, they might actually pass it. If we could get them to overcome the filibuster and tell Moscow Mitch to go to hell. But I guess that's an issue of a different color, okay, or an issue for later. I think the first thing we can do is to vote against every Republican incumbent in the Senate, because every last one of them is an enemy of the people. That's the truth. Every last one of them should be replaced. 1/3 of them, more than 1/3 of them, will be up for election this year. The Democrats have a great advantage in the 2020 elections. There are a lot more Republicans seats up for grabs, okay, than Democratic seats. So, we definitely have to turn them out. Now, we have to turn out some of the Democrats, too, where there are progressive challengers to them. Okay, but I don't know how many cases there are of that at present. But if there are no such challenges, many of those Democrats are in quite safe states, and therefore we will have some room to vote for third-party candidates. So, that's my message for tonight. I would like now to turn to sorry about that. I inadvertently ended the video, but I am back in it now. But Bonnie says there's no sound. Okay, my sound is back. I can now consider your comments. I'm sorry, I inadvertently hit the wrong button. And Barbara Wernick says, there it is. We lack the support. Kay says, AOC is a very smart young woman. I saw there was a discussion on the on the Jimmy Dore show with by Dylan Radigan about foreclosures again. SMH, haven't watched it yet, not, but I will ASAP. Sandy Degg says, can we clone AOC? We've been trying to clone her, but actually Tlaib and Omar and Presley are all pretty good. The four of them, okay, are very, very good. Okay, I wish but some of them had the rhetorical abilities, okay, of AOC, but they're very, very good. They have strong rhetorical abilities. Kay says, I wish Sandy, and Lovely says Sandy Degg. Kay says, I figured that was coming. They all want Social Security, okay, and Medicare gone. Yeah, the Republicans have always wanted Social Security, okay, and Medicare gone. And Rick says, yeah, that way when the crisis is over, they get rid of Social Security. They get rid of Social Security, okay, unless the Democrats come back into office. At that point, if Trump loses, and if the Republicans should lose the Senate, those programs are going to come back with a vengeance, and maybe we can constitute them in the right way this time so that the refunding of them is automatic from year to year. We can do that. That can be done. We can fix that. Okay, so it's done. There are certain parts of Medicare that are funded in that way. For example, the Bush benefit that he put in, Part D, is funded, okay, in that way. So Linda Burton says, Trump has no clue about what is happening to ordinary Americans. No, he has a clue. He's just a stinking, mean old man. He has a clue. He doesn't care. Trump doesn't care about anyone except Trump. Lana says, I hope everyone heard Dr. Joe's last statement. Barbara Wernick says, epic fail. You're talking about my last statement? And Sandy Degg says, Trump has never been an ordinary person. He grew up rich. His father was a jerk, and he's a jerk and a freak. He is. He is. He is the ultimate spoiled brat. Rick says, have to go. Progressive Caucus live now. U.S. Progressive Videos is another thing live. Rick says, night all. Lana says, bastards. Sandy Degg says, don't know what Sandy Degg said. Stacey Van Veen says, and McConnell needs the guillotine. Kay says, corporate Dems are no better than the GOP. Sandy Degg says, they are the GOP 2.0. They are the new Democrats, the centrist Democrats, the problem solvers caucus. They're all GOP light. They're like the Rockefeller Republicans. I don't even think they're as liberal as the Rockefeller Republicans of the 1960s were. At least they didn't hate Social Security. Sandy, I keep telling blue no matter who voters that they are no different than poor GOP voters are voting against their own interests all the time. SMH. They don't want to hear it, though, as they drank, and they continue to drink, the Kool-Aid. Kay says, I say that candidates must earn our vote from here on in. Russ says, I need to turn in. Lots of hard work around the house today with Pop. Okay, Russ. See you tomorrow, I hope. I'll be here with Jeff Epstein tomorrow. We'll be talking about the Fed again. And Carmen says, friends, I can't hang out tonight. Got a cluster migraine coming on. I'm looking for something to knock me out. I hope these knockoff sorry, I'm having so much trouble with this. Okay, Benadryl. Okay, knock off Benadryl. Do the job. Blessed be. I hope they do the job too. Sandy says, feel better, Carmen. And Stacy says, take care, Carmen. Thinking of you. Sandy Deck says, I hear you. Stacy says, they're sound. Stacy says, Porter and Representative Jamie Raskin. Two pretty progressive people also. Two pretty progressive people. Pretty good people. So Porter's great when it comes to the banks. I don't know how great she's going to be when it comes to the Green New Deal. I don't know how great she's going to be when it comes to supporting the Jayapal Tlaib bill. Susan says Trump is not polling well in swing states. I know he's not polling well right now, okay, in swing states. And one of the latest polls now shows him 55-40 behind Biden. Incredible. I mean, it's 5 points going in Biden's direction. But I think that's going to fade away because once people see the way Biden performs against Trump, well, it may be closer, but Trump is so terrible and he keeps trying to do such terrible things that people is finally going to get wind of the fact that Trump is just their enemy. He's simply their enemy. There are no two ways about it. Trump is just an enemy. Sam Wood says they managed to cancel SS. Where does all that money go? And what do you mean? Where does all... Oh, you mean what's in the SS fund? Okay, at this point. Well, what they really want to do, their plan is not only to cancel SS, but it's to privatize it. So they want to turn that fund over to the private sector so the private sector can profit off it. Who in the private sector? Their cronies, of course. Everything they do is for their cronies. And Barbara Wernick says, no, the epic failure was the pandemic response, never you. Thank you, Barbara. I appreciate that. Kay says, Katie Porter is great. When it comes to the banks and when it comes to oversight, yes, Katie Porter is great. But when it comes to the economics, when it comes to fiscal policy, okay, I have to be shown that she's great. I know the squad is great on that, but whether Katie Porter will join them on that, I don't know. Susan Eldridge says, people don't like how Trump is handling this crisis. It's true. They don't like it. They're getting increasingly less favorable on it. If he forces people to go back to work, okay, and a lot of people die, and people know people who have died, then nothing will save Trump in the fall. Not even a coup d'etat. Nothing is going to save him in the fall. If he does that, that is a monumental error. He can do all the posturing he wants, but if he orders people back to work, and they get through this business about relieving businesses of their liability for not providing safe conditions, then Trump is going to have his butt handed to him in the fall. Stacy says Biden is not capable of handling the crisis. He's not capable of handling the crisis, but a team composed of his wife, Obama, and some good economists might do a much better job on this crisis. It's important to get Larry Summers out of there. He is terrible. Jared Bernstein, who was Biden's chief economist, in the old administration, is much better for us and for people, will be much better for us and for people than Larry Summers would be. Margot Shepard says, Pelosi choosing Donna Shalala instead of Katie Porter really got to me. Well, I'm glad it got to you, but what I'm going to say now is that Nancy Pelosi has no redeeming qualities when it comes to this coronavirus crisis. She is not doing a thing for us. And you can see where her mind is at through that video, what I call the let 'em eat cake video, except it was a let 'em eat ice cream video. I mean, you have to be mentally unbalanced to put out a video like that in a time like this. You have to be losing your marbles, completely out of touch with people, to show $22,000 worth of refrigerator freezers that were filled, it appeared, with nothing but designer ice cream. I mean, you got to have something wrong up here. Her political sense must have entirely left her, because she probably never talks to people back home. All she talks to is the people in her leadership team in Congress. Yes, the ice cream video. The let them eat ice cream video. Sandy says the Obamas have been all over the TV lately, him and her. Yeah, we may still see Michelle as the vice presidential candidate. And then we know that Obama is going to be living right across the street from the White House. Kay says, I lost my hubby to cancer, and my home, which was everything I ever worked for my whole life from age 16. I know, Kay, it's just awful. It's just awful. Will Jared Bernstein be on Biden's team in the White House? I believe he will. He's acceptable to the mainstream, and I think Biden likes Jared, because, it's hard not to like Jared. He comes over as such a reasonable man. Well, there's a little bit of this, and there's a little bit of that, and there's this side, and there's that side, and there's the other side, and there's, well, this is a very good idea, but it might have a little bit. That's the kind of guy that he is. But I don't think he's feckless. I think he will come down with a position, and he will support doing something economically to restore consumption in the economy if the Trump administration has not been bludgeoned this year into working with the Democrats to do something to get us out of the terrible fix. Sandy says how convenient for Michelle. She can ride to work with Joe B. Ho ho! Ho ho! Susan said Jared was on the MMT panel with Randy Ray. Yeah, the panel in Congress on fiscal policy, okay, with Randy Ray. And as I recall, that guy from the Heritage, is he from the Heritage Foundation, or the guy from Denmark, Jacob Kierkegaard, was also on that panel, right? And the fourth guy on that panel was the guy from Lord Olivier Turner, right? He was the guy who made clear that it's the Bank of England that creates the money, that it's not tax money. He started talking about how the British government should use overt monetary financing, OMF, which gave rise to my term that Congress should use overt congressional financing, okay, or OCF. Susan says, when Congress had the MMT hearing, yeah, I know. Susan says, I think Ray and Bernstein were in agreement, forget who else was there. The Republicans were attacking them. Yeah, the Republicans were attacking them, and Kierkegaard was also attacking them. But they were being supported by Turner, though. Who didn't say anything negative about them. So they brought in a ringer from England to testify in that panel. And Kierkegaard from Denmark. Yeah, I know he works for Heritage Foundation, but he's from Denmark. He's got to be related to Soren by Kierkegaard. It's got to be. The only two people I've ever heard of who are named Kierkegaard. Sorry for the latest interruption. That one was not my fault. But anyway, Susan Eldridge said, yeah, Roe was there, but he wasn't testifying for the MMTers at the hearing. He was one of the questioners, wasn't he? It was on his committee, I think. Not his committee, but the committee he's on. And Senator Yarmouth, yeah, of Kentucky, I think was defending MMT. Yes, I think he was too, but he doesn't know much about MMT. But he was defending MMT, and Roe was defending MMT as well. I didn't think Randy did a real good job on that panel. I think he could have done a much better job. Susan said, yeah, Roe was asking questions. Yes, he was, but he was asking very friendly questions. He was putting the questions so Randy would be able to make the points. I don't recall whether Jamie Galbraith was there at that panel. Was he? Wasn't he able to make it? Sandy Tech says Stephanie Kelton would have been better. Yes, I agree. I think Stephanie is better at putting the points but two politicians because she has that experience on the Hill now, talking to politicians for a considerable time. And she also has a facility. She also has a facility for putting things in a very clear way to folks who are used to using ordinary language as opposed to economics language. Susan says, no, Jamie wasn't there. Was Joe Stiglitz there at this one? I'm forgetting. I seem to remember only four of them were there, but I may be mistaken. I think I named the four, but anyway. Joe Stiglitz often comes into these discussions. Kelton explains it in a way that lay people can understand. Yes. She does a better job of that, I think, than any of the other MMT people. Any other comments or questions? If not, then I'm going to say good night. And I hope to see you all again tomorrow. Oh, I ought to remind you, when the YouTube goes up, please share, like, and subscribe. And also my Patreon account, patreon.com/Joe_Firestone. So Kay says, well, I'm a tired old bag, so I'm out of here for tonight. Thank you, Joe, and everybody else for a great discussion. Sandy Degg, she should run for something. I think once she did try to run for a local office in the Kansas City area. I don't think she succeeded, okay, in that area. She might do a lot better where she is now, though, okay, at Stony Brook. I have to find out what congressional district that is and who inhabits it but right now. Susan says, good night. Good night, Susan. And also Dolores says, thank you and good night. So thank you and good night all. And again, I'll be here with Jeff Epstein tomorrow to talk about further questions he has about the Fed, and I'll do my best to answer them, though I'm not the biggest expert in the world on the Fed, but I will do my best. So Mustafa Hajimar says, good night. Thank you, Mustafa. I didn't realize you were here, or I would have said hello before this. And Dolores says, I will be sharing YouTube. Thank you, Dolores. That is very, very helpful. And thank you very much for your shares tonight. I'm sure you're quite active. Good night.